we're off. Thank you, Alice.
Beautiful. Okay, so as I mentioned as well, I also have, as a result of the journey, I've created a website called overturnthetables.net and a Facebook page that goes by the same name. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of where Overturn the Tables comes from to sort of start us off. I can click to get to the next slide. Maybe not. Oh, here we go. So when I was going through the Lenten process, one of the readings that really stood out to me, because I was going through a period of reflection at the time, was in our Bible, for those that aren't Catholic, there's a section in Mark 11, chapter 11, verses 15 to 18. Before that section in the Bible, what's happening is Jesus is going into Jerusalem, so into the capital city where the temple is. And the first century Palestine and all that stuff, that was a big deal. Like, there was Passover about to happen. There was a lot of conflict between the Jewish people and the Roman occupation at the time, and there was like sort of tension there. And Jesus wasn't the only one that was being persecuted for his actions at the time, but he goes in there, and this is what happens. So it's called cleansing the temple. I'm just going to read from my Bible here. They came to Jerusalem, and on entering the temple area, he began to drive out those selling and buying there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. He did not permit anyone to carry anything through the temple area. Then he taught them, saying, "It is not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples,' but you have made it into a den of thieves." So when I read that, as I was going through this Lenten process, and I decided that I was going to give up my rubbish bin, I'd had a very terrible day the day before. I'd had compost in my, maggots in my compost, and my recipe for my new deodorant wasn't working, and just everything was not happening. And then I read that passage, and I just realized in that moment that was what God was doing to me. He'd come into my life, and he completely flipped over my entire life and told me that my culture and everything about how I was thinking about the world had to change. And that was ultimately what inspired me to keep going on the rest of the journey, because I was literally about to quit. And then, it sort of spoke to me. And that's why I decided to call my Facebook page and my website after Overturn the Tables. And I think it's such a visceral action. And ultimately, that's what Jesus ends up being crucified for, is those actions where he goes into the temple and he disrupts the Passover celebrations that were happening at the time. And that they didn't like that, basically. And that's why he ended up being killed. So in 2015, I suppose this all started. So as Barbara was saying about Laudate Si, I love Laudate Si. It's my favorite document ever. So I read that when in 2015, my mum sent it to me, this link, and she said, "Oh, you should probably read this. It's quite great." So I read the whole thing, and it took me a little while, but then to sort of figure out how God was calling me to take action in relation to the environment. Because again, like I'm not a barricade person. I'm not a person that can go out there and really strike and do all those sort of things. I'm not confident enough to do that. And I feel like for me, there's more productive things that I could be doing as opposed to just yelling at people. So in Lent in 2018, over the 40 days, I chose 40 things to do to become zero waste. And in hindsight, some of them I've now taken back. I do differently. I've altered. But in the 40 days, the 40 things turned into 100, because I found different things that I could do better. And as a result, I can do this as well. It'll be super easy. So it really just having that time of fasting where I set aside the time, sort of like a diet, where I said, for this amount of time, I'm going to really focus on this one thing. That allowed me to reflect and allowed me to step back and take the time to really go through this ecological conversion. As a result of that, and I had my bad days, and Jesus spoke to me through the word, and Overturn the Tables developed as a result of that. And I decided that my Facebook page and a website would be the best way to communicate with people about how I do this sort of thing. I'm going to share with you a lot today from a book called Drawdown. I read that and it has really inspired me about sort of the best ways to help the environment. So I'll share with you a bit about that as well. And now I also run workshops and develop resources. For those that are interested as well, I'm currently in the process of developing, it isn't a Catholic response, but you know, can be adapted for different contexts. I'm developing a resource for individuals and for families to go on a similar process to what I did. It wouldn't be based on the 40 days, but it's based on the 7 sections of Laudato Si. So if anyone's interested in that, please give me a bell and I'll let you know when I have finished it, because it's currently being edited. So this is Drawdown. And this is why I sort of live out Laudato Si and why it's inspired me. So Drawdown is some scientific research that's been done recently. I think they only published about 2019, at the beginning of 2019. But they have a website that they consistently update with the most up-to-date information about climate science. So in the book itself, it goes through the top 80 solutions to sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere back into the ground where it belongs. And some of the solutions are really quite surprising. Like, for example, educating women and girls and family planning sit quite high up in terms of the top 80. They sit in the top 10. And some people think that when they did the numbers, they thought, well, if you combine those two things together, they actually end up being at number 1. But the author of the book, Dr. Holmes Rolston, he says this. He says, our planetary crisis is one of spiritual information, not so much sustainable development, certainly not escalating consumption, but using the earth with justice and charity. Science cannot take us there, religion perhaps can. And I think that quote really highlights the fact that the religious response from all facets of religious life, so from every single corner of religious life, we can do this. It's written in our laws. It's written in the way that we know we have to interact with creation. It's part of every major religious tradition and also all the minor religious traditions. It's basically the foundation for Aboriginal spiritualities. Like, their connection with the earth is so intrinsically linked with their understanding of ancestors that it is the way that we need to approach this. And I find that to see that in a science book is just phenomenal, because they obviously can see that as well. So in this book, we end up with these, I've just brought out for us the top 10 solutions. So these are in order of the ones that are the most cost effective, and also the most, the solutions that already exist that bring the most amount of carbon out of the atmosphere and into the ground. So the first one is refrigerators and air conditioners. So of course we know back a couple of decades ago when they figured out the whole issue with the hydrofluorocarbons and all that sort of stuff. In some other countries, they're not as lucky as we are in terms of being able to deal with that situation. So that's quite high on the list of issues that we have. But also our use of air conditioners is a big deal, because of course air conditioners heat, no matter whether you're cooling your environment or whether you're heating your environment, either way they end up in a net heat gain for the environment, so contributing to global warming there. And of course using fossil fuels, if we are doing that, contributes to carbon emissions as well. Now, bearing this in mind, this is an international study. So onshore wind turbines internationally are a better solution for sequestering carbon than solar panels are. You'll see the rooftop solar and building solar farms are at 8 and 10. In Australia, though, that's a different story, because we have a lot more sun than we do wind because of our climate and all that sort of stuff. So for us, if we were to reorder this for Australia, rooftop solar and building solar farms would be significantly higher on the list. Number 3 and 4. This is the top 3 and 4 solutions is reducing food waste and eating a plant-rich diet. This is where my sort of space is. especially when I read this, I feel like, you know, I don't really use an aircon. I've sort of got that. I can't build a wind turbine. Don't quite have the money to do that. But I can reduce my food waste and I can eat a plant-rich diet, and that's what I am doing. So my husband and I, when we transitioned from during Lent, we reduced the amount of meat that we were intaking. So we were, prior to Lent in 2018, we were probably eating meat about once a week. And then after that, we probably, we were eating meat every day a week. And now we maybe eat meat once a week or once every 2 weeks now. My husband's a bit more of a carnivore than me, and he asks for it a lot more than I'm willing to buy it. But I keep telling him we need to keep reducing it. We're doing really well. But on the reducing food waste side of things, this comes into the whole zero waste culture. So one of the things that I learned about being zero waste as I was going through it is it allows me, or it had allowed me to see the world differently. In our world, we have this process. I might just stop sharing so that you can see my hands as I'm doing this. So when we exploit the earth, okay, so we start off with, like, I don't know, drawing out coal or oil from the ground, okay, then we do something with it. So maybe we make plastic, or maybe we synthesize it to do something else, right? Some sort of resource. Could be cotton even, okay? So we synthesize the cotton to make something like clothes. We then make the item, and that item becomes, you know, something that people purchase and they buy, they sell, or they gain money from, all that sort of thing. And it gets used at that point. So people wear clothes, or they use plastic, whatever it is. And then that object ends up in the bin, okay? It ends up in a garbage bin or a recycling bin. Up here in Queensland, we still have issues with recycling. So oftentimes our recycling ends up in a landfill anyway. So that's where it ends up, is it ends up being in a hole in the ground. Unless we take that straight line and we snap it and make it into a circle, okay, we, at every single one of those points, so at the exploitation phase where we're taking resources, to where we are manufacturing, selling, and then using and ultimately throwing away, every single one of those places, we are emitting carbon of some description. Okay, so if it comes to food, right, if we're using like farming in agricultural practices where the soil isn't allowed to regenerate properly, it ends up being detrimental, like it doesn't work and can't sequester as much carbon. If we pull it out of the ground, then we're making, you know, heaps of packaged foods or processed foods. There's carbon being used at every single one of those points. Then when we eat our foods, we cook things and all that sort of stuff, we then consume it. And then if it ends up as food waste, so our leftovers that end up in landfill, one of the things that happens when it gets to landfill is it can't produce, like, there's not enough microbes and, you know, great things in landfill like worms and stuff like that to allow the food to be able to break down properly. When it's trapped there, especially if it's trapped by something like plastic, if something happens and that plastic then breaks open, the emissions that are released for that are methane. So methane is the chemical that gets produced as a result of that. Now, methane is different to carbon dioxide. So it's depending on which scientist you're talking to, it's either between 4 and 60 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So that means it's stronger and it's worse for the environment, but it doesn't last as long in the atmosphere. So it's easier to sequester, and it also cycles around a lot quickly, a lot faster in the whole process. So that's why food waste and reducing food waste, and they're talking on industrial scales in terms of, you know, when Woolworths and Coles, for example, chuck out all their dodgy looking tomatoes because they're a bit lumpy in some places or whatever, to individual food waste where we are putting things into landfill. So that's how that sort of, that whole thing is related to sequestering of carbon. I'll just head back to the pictures here. As I mentioned after that, so for the rest of drawdown, so fixing up our forests, healing the forests is still part of that whole process. Educating women and girls and helping parents choose, so family planning, are are part of the top 10. Now, as I said before, educating women and girls and helping parents to choose when they have children in family planning, those two things combined, if we add them together, would end up ending up to be at number 1 there. So they believe that if we can do those two things, especially in countries like India, if we can educate women and then they have less children as a result of that, then their impact on the environment would be significantly decreased. Okay, so that's sort of, I suppose, some of the science behind where the thinking comes from in terms of why I'm zero waste in relation to food and plastics and other things. Where's my PowerPoint not moving? There we go. Alrighty, so as I said, with food waste, okay, so the way that Drawdown measures it is that it can sequester up to 87 to 94 gigatons of CO2 by 2050, they believe. Okay, so they estimate that that can be the reduction of it. And this is just a little bit of the summary, okay? So a third of our food raised or prepared does not make it from the farm or factory to the fork, okay? In terms of Australia, we can stop that. We can reduce that by doing things like buying local, making sure that we buy ugly. So at the shops and stuff, making sure we buy the ugly produce. And all of those little things do contribute to ultimately helping all the carbon to sequester. It says here the food we waste is responsible for roughly 8% of our global emissions. That's quite a bit. Okay, losing food to one waste heap or another is an issue in both the high end and in low income countries. So we have the capacity to be able to make changes in this particular situation. It says here specifically for high income. So in the regions of higher income, which is Australia, willful food dominates rather along the supply chain. Retailers and consumers reject food based on bumps, bruises, and colouring, or simply odour, and buy and serve too much. I don't know about you guys, but like if I've gone to a tavern or something like that and they have these, you know, massive meals that just no one can consume because they're so large, I always feel really guilty because I know there's so much food that's left over. So my husband now and I just now tend not to go to a place like that. Or if we are going to eat out somewhere, we'll eat, if we know it's going to be a large meal, we'll combine meals together and just eat from the same plate or something like that. Maybe not during COVID, but yeah, we'll tend to do those sorts of things. So that's in relation to food waste. I'm just worried that I realize my laptop is about to die, so I might go grab my charger in 2 seconds. So again, I think the last Living the Change workshop was about transitioning to a plant-based diet. Was that one of the, Philippa, was that one of the things that happened last time?
Yeah, so we've begun this year just with trying to get the ball rolling, coming out of COVID with some online discussions. Yeah. So we had transition to a plant-based diet with Fahima and Peter.
Yes. Yeah. So I won't spend an enormous amount of time on that, but yeah. Again, for this one, you can see the amount of carbon that can be reduced with that. So 65 to 91 gigatons of carbon can be reduced and sequestered by transitioning to plant-based. Because of the way that I think about zero waste, so in terms of the packaging and all that stuff, I already do eat a pretty plant-based diet. We've reduced our consumption of meat purely because it's difficult to get meat that isn't covered in plastics and doesn't produce waste. And we also reduced the amount of dairy that we have as well. So I still use things like honey. Honey is really easy for me to get zero waste because you can refill them. Cheese and milk is definitely not easy to get zero waste. So I tend to buy those a lot less now where I can as well. So again here, shifting to a rich diet in plants is a demand-side solution to global warming that runs counter to the meat-centric Western diet on the rise globally. That diet comes with a steep climate price tag, 1/5 of our global emissions. If cattle were their own nation, they would be the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Now, on this point, I just want to share with you again, there is a book that I have really taken to. It's called, not that one. It's a really good book too, actually. Oh, no, sorry. My copy of it is with my mother-in-law. Sorry, my bad. I thought I had a copy with it. Never mind. It's called On Eating Meat. If you want to write it down, there's a really great book on eating meat. Now, the guy that writes it, he talks about all the meat ethics. So he's not vegan, but he has his own farm, and he talks about how basically the farming processes that we have now are very wasteful, but they're also detrimental to the environment. And he goes through how we need to transition farming to be able to better support the environment. And he talks about things like, if we want to reduce our waste, eating veal is a really great way of eating like a low carbon impact diet, because even though it's still cow, because we don't require as many bulls, the veal are often male baby cows. So eating veal is often better because they get executed as a result and all that sort of stuff. So for those that do still eat meat, like eating veal is a better idea compared to just normal beef and stuff like that. Whereas cheese is incredibly wasteful. Like, I tried making my own cheese a little while ago. I didn't realize how much whey is left over as a result. And there's not really much that you can do with whey from what I found out, unless you're sticking it in some other things. And I ended up with like 3 liters of whey to some tiny little amount of cheese. And I just thought, oh, this has got to change. So, so being aware of that whole process. Philippa, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, I'm thinking, Alice, that I would love to pause you long enough for you to get your charger, because I think what we don't want to happen is we don't want you to be in mid-sentence and then evaporate on us, because then we'll have a whole lot of unfinished questions.
Well, what I might do is, hang on, if I go back to screen sharing, I'll just go to, I think the next one I was going to show you. This is in relation to recycling. So this isn't in the top 10, but this is one of the ones in recycling. So you can see that recycling itself can reduce by quite a lot of gigatons. So what I'll do is I'll go to the next slide where it has the information here. I'll let you read that, and I'll be 2 seconds going to get my charger. All right, I'll be back.
If you're anything like me, I have to move the faces around so I can read it, because it's the full screen. It's a bit tricky to read past the faces. You can move them around.
You can minimise the faces and have no faces on at all if you like, Philippa.
Last time I tried that, I vanished altogether, and I took a while to re-find you all.
But if you just click on speaker only, then only one face is on.
Yeah, jolly good. Living and learning in Zoom land.
Alrighty, I'm all good. Awesome. All right, so I thought we'd open up, before I sort of move on to a bit more of the process, now that I've sort of given you a bit of the science and all that sort of stuff, how are we feeling about that science? Because it's a bit to take in for all of us to sort of, think about and reflect on. So what are people thinking about that? If you just want to unmute and tell us, how are you feeling?
I'm just going to jump in and just say one short thing. There is no away. Like, the idea that you could throw away doesn't exist.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's just you're throwing it to landfill or, somewhere. Exactly. Good.
Do others want to join in? I'm meant to be facilitating, not hogging the airwaves.
I'm excited about the information you're giving us, Alice, and I was shocked about the waste, as it were, that's around cheese.
Yes.
That was news for me.
Yeah, it's quite I was shocked when I made it, because my mum thought, she was like, she gave me a Christmas present as a cheese making kit. I was like, oh yeah, I'll give this a go. So it takes quite a long time. The amount of waste product from the milk, when you essentially just split it into the curds and whey section, you only use a tiny amount of curd, and quite a large bit of whey that you just can't do anything with. Well, I find you can't do anything with. I did research it, and I thought, A lot of people use whey powder as a protein sort of supplement or something like that. And I was like, nah, I'm not really into that type of thing. So, so as a result, we've sort of reduced more of our cheese consumption because of that.
I wonder more in macro production of cheese, how much of that whey is used, because that's often doing things at home is not as economical or as sensible as what it sounds when it's being produced at and the economies of scale sometimes make it better for you than worse for you, sort of.
Definitely, yeah.
Can I comment here?
Yes. Go.
That the amount of fodder that cows and bulls eat take water to create, and that water becomes part of the whey. So I think it's really useful for us to connect some dots way down the line that include, for instance, the electricity that it takes to make whey into whey powder.
Yes.
So, yes, we can look at the immediate waste, and I think what's really useful is to also look at the interconnections and the wider use of energy and water and other resources, for instance, fertilizer and pesticides on what the cows eat. So, to just look at waste, I think is a bit narrow. I think we need to widen the field.
Yes, and you're totally right. So as I was saying, when I went through this whole zero waste process, I didn't just end up looking at food or plastic or whatever, like what was, going in my bin. It ended up being about, that's like things like water, electricity, everything was about, okay, well, how can I reduce basically my exploitation of the Earth's resources? How do I stop that? How do I tread with a lighter footprint on the Earth than what I currently am now? Things like, the bucket in the shower, which I think, 9 out of 10 people do anyway. Making sure that I use that water to be able to water my plants and all of those sorts of things, and using my compost and my food scraps from my worm farms and things like that to help me then grow the food that I eat. And really, like I said, making that straight line, snapping it and turning it into a circle and building that own circular economy for myself. So that's really been what the process has been about. But I've also done that with people. So my grandma, right, my nan, she's about 4 foot and she's the most caring person in the entire world. And I love her to bits. And when I was a teenager, my parents we would go and visit her. She lives on the Gold Coast here in Queensland. And we would go and visit her, and she lived right next to one of the biggest shopping outlets that's in Queensland, the Harbour Town Shopping Centre. And my parents we would go there like when I was about 15 or so, and my mum and dad would say, oh, we're just going to duck over to Harbour Town to go and look at shoes or whatever. But they wouldn't invite my grandma to come with them because she walks slowly, she's got a broken back and, all this sort of stuff. And as a result, what happened was all of our trips to go and visit her would just be them rocking up, having morning tea with her, going to the shops and then driving home. And that was about it. Whereas I wanted to go and spend the whole day just with my grandma. And I wanted to learn about, how to make strawberry jam from her. And I wanted to play card games with her, and like all of those sorts of things that we have always done. And so when I was like a bit older and I could drive and do all those sorts of things by myself, I sort of said to my parents, no, I'm going to go and visit her when I want to, and I will do the things that I want to with her. And we would go I'd take her to art galleries and things like that. And we would walk slowly together. And to me, I wasn't then throwing away that time with my grandma. I wasn't throwing her away as a person, whereas I felt like that's what my parents were doing, was they were throwing away, she's 80 something now and she's not healthy, but I'm never going to waste that time with her. I'm always going to treasure that, and I'm always going to make sure I get the most out of out of that time with her. And we have such a fantastic relationship, and I love her to bits. But, you know, that whole zero waste mindset really sort of brought to the forefront of exactly how important it is that we change our thinking and we change our culture. And that's how it sort of links to, I suppose, what I learned from Jesus, is that's what we have to go towards, is changing our culture in relation to all this.
No, one thing you said there was about slowing down.
Yes.
When you were walking with your nan.
Yeah.
And that seems to me like a pretty important thing that we could all do to slow down and really think about the products that we buy, the downline repercussions of those products. So rather than going and simply buying what's on the shelves, that we think about those things and you know, that notion of slowing down with your gran and obviously learning from her and her culture and her way of thinking, that seems to me like a profound contribution that your gran has made, perhaps without even realizing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Do any other people have any questions for us?
I do. A question. Could I ask, I thought, I've gone almost totally off meat, but I thought that pork stuff was the most, was the best kind of meat to eat, but no, veal.
I think, well, veal in terms of the waste, the reason I don't eat a lot of pork purely because of the ethics around how they treat pigs. I'm really not a big fan of that.
Anybody older than you that read Peter Singer would hear you saying veal and think about those veal kept locked up out of the sunlight, so their veal was like, you know, there's a legacy in many meat products, but I think that Fight for Planet A did a pretty good job at the show with the plates of the different meats and getting people to put in order of low to high, high to low.
Yeah, that was great, wasn't it?
So that was beef, then lamb, then pork, then chicken. He didn't have
kangaroo.
And kangaroo.
You know, we forget our own native stuff. That isn't on enough things. The other question I have is goat's milk. You know, I eat goat because I can't have. So I think when we're talking about this, I want to see where goat is, because goat is a smaller animal, less harm. The other thing that I also thought in the Planet A, that was absolutely fabulous. I had no idea it was the burping cows that created the methane. And the picture of how much methane it was, that made me think.
Yeah. But it's also, so cows are a twofold problem, because they do produce methane when they burp and they fart and all that sort of stuff. But the other problem is the amount of land that we clear to be able to do the soy and grains to feed them. I just think that that's so counterintuitive, like to do it that way. And that book that I mentioned, they talk about that in great detail about how that the whole cattle industry really is quite a mess at the moment. Don't tell a cattle farmer that I said that, but yeah, that whole situation needs sort of fixing.
Is it an Australian book? Because I think the conditions here are a bit different. Good.
Yeah, no, he's so he has a farm in Victoria. I'll try and send Philippa a link to the book on Amazon or something.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of links, and it's where, for me, taking the sort of the big picture of living the change about where lifestyle change, the changes we can make at the individual level, the community level, the institutional and political level. There are threads that go through, and there are places where people do deep dive. They've got an interest in one element. And I guess my idea with this sequential deep dives into bits of it, and not to lock anybody into that, but to get us all feeling more familiar with the terrain of what living the change can mean in the different sectors, so that we can go out and become change agents. Because while we go through our own pathway, changing ourselves, we could be very frugal, and we alone won't make a difference. But if we can encourage people in our spheres to see that there are things they could do with their own lifestyle that wouldn't mean they need to live in a hair shirt and live on bread and dripping for the next decade. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are creative and fun ways of making some of these changes. And I think these forums with Alice, given your perspective, are like adding pearls that we can string together to be part of the way we need to go forward.
But I think too, a thing on that, we have a very big responsibility to be role models. So as a teacher, I know that's 90% of my job, is just role modeling to students how they need to learn. But I also need to role model to them how to be. So in my classrooms, like I would never throw paper in the bin. It would always go in the recycling bin, because the students see that and they see those actions. But our kids do, like if you have kids, I don't have kids yet. I'm only 25, give me a few years. Our kids see the behaviors that the adults take. And one of the things, like Barbara would know and Laudate see, there's a lot of talk about dialogue, like bringing young people into the dialogue that needs to happen. But I always get quite frustrated at hearing that, because unless they see those actions being modeled to them and the behaviors and the culture being modeled to them, they're not going to actually see how it fits into the whole scheme of everything that we need to do. So they'll see it as, oh, it's this big, cloudy issue. And that's what we hear from our students, is that, climate change is just this massive, big issue that we can't tackle. We really can, but we can only do that if we change the culture and behavior that we have. And that's really hard. So it really is, like, it is really up to the adults to make those changes first before we expect the students to do anything other than dialogue with us. So, so being our role models, and even for our own family and friends, like my mum, she, like, as soon as she saw me at the markets using my reusable fresh produce bags, she started doing that as well, because she's like, oh, that's so easy. Because it is. It's not difficult things, but it's lots of slightly uncomfortable, smaller things that happened. So I wanted to share with you like some of the things that I do, or the things that I sort of preface in terms of the actions that I take. So if you bear with me. Sorry, this was just another bit more information about food waste specifically. And these are things that I do as well. So planning ahead and writing a shopping list, like that's such an easy thing that most people do. But it really does help not to
I don't.
Yeah, but it does help us to reduce, overbuying things and making sure that we only buy what we need. I live with a shift worker, so I have to be on top of everything that we eat all the time. Otherwise my husband doesn't eat anything. So, we plan our meals, which is the second one there. We make sure we plan everything for the week to ensure that we've got enough food, but not too much. We also take we do things like leftovers and all of that sort of stuff. We shop smart, we shop little, we shop local, we shop fresh. We do all of those things. We freeze things if we have surplus, and we make sure that we compost all of our foods that we can. I tend not to compost any meat products just because of the wildlife that tends to get in there when it wants to. But everything else goes in there when we do have leftover food scraps. But even things like food scraps, like at the moment, I have a ginormous old ice cream container that's just filled with like leftover pumpkin and leftover onion and things like that, which I'll turn into a stock next week, which will go in my soup, which I'll take to work as leftovers, like all of those sorts of things to be able to help make that circle in my own life. So this is, I suppose, what I've got here up on the screen. This is, I suppose, the process of thinking that I transitioned to when I went through Lent. So, for example, can I refuse? This is just based on the reduce, reuse, recycle process, but it's a bit more in depth. So, first of all, I think, okay, well, can I refuse this item? Do I need this item in my life? Do I need to buy that chocolate? Do I need to buy those clothes? Whatever it is. If I can reduce things, so reducing my purchases, especially in relation to things like electronics and clothes and homewares as well. So reducing how often I buy clothes, how often I buy electronics. Like I don't update my phone unless it's absolutely necessary. Like I'm not on one of those plans that clicks over every 2 years and you get a new phone sort of thing. I think that's pointless and stupid. reusing things. So makeup wipes, I don't wear a lot of makeup, but when I do wear makeup, I use the reusable makeup wipes to get rid of it. My water bottle, of course, every person needs a reusable water bottle. I love refilling things. So we have a source food shop about 10 minutes from us. And I just take my jars to them to be able to refill with flour and pasta and you know, rice and all the staples, as well as things like snacks. They have some really good like peanuts and walnuts and things like that there. So I take my jars to redo that. I also refill. I've been very lucky. My butcher is still allowing me to bring a container to refill for chicken or veal or whatever we're getting for our meat, our own containers. So I rock up there with my blue containers, and they always know me as the blue container person. And they'll weigh the container first, put the meat in, and then only charge me for the container, for the meat itself. I compost as well, so I rot things where needed to. And then I start to recycle. So if I can't do any of these, the first 5 things here first, so refuse, reduce, reuse, refill, and rot. If I can't do any of those, then I'll start to look at what's recyclable. Okay, so if I have to buy something, so say for example, if I don't have enough time in the week and I know that I wanted to make peanut butter, but I didn't get a chance to, I'll go and buy peanut butter, but in a glass jar as opposed to a plastic jar. Mostly because I know that the plastic is likely to end up not being recycled properly, whereas the jar I know I will use over and over and over again. Or oats, for example, sometimes they might run out of oats at the bulk food shop, and I'll just go and buy an Uncle Toby's like one that's made of cardboard, and then I'll recycle the cardboard from there. But that's far down on the list, mostly because in Queensland we have a very poor recycling system. So I very much put that down low on the priority list. I also buy things secondhand. So electronics, clothes. My husband and I recently moved house, and we've got a lot of our our secondhand furniture off Facebook Marketplace and things like that. So we needed to sort of swap and change things based on what was going to fit. So we sold a few things, bought a few things, which was good. I'll buy my food local. So the local like fruit and veggie shop, I'll go there before I go to Woolworths to make sure that I get fresh produce, but as fresh produce as possible, but also the local produce. And again, when I go to like the local bulk food shop or the local fruit and veg shop, I tend to be able to have a conversation with the person that's serving me. Like the other day on the weekend, I went to go and get some more honey from the bulk food shop, and honey takes a long time to pour. Like the poor guy was there for about 5 minutes trying to pour out my honey into my squeezy bottle that I took there. But in that time, I was able to have a conversation with that person about what was going on, and we built that relationship. And I feel like that's so important. Like making that person feel valued for the day, making sure they have a smile on their face, and me ending up walking out of there with a smile on my face. Whereas how many times do we like go to Woolworths, grab the few things that we need, and we're out of there with a grumpy face on and without that personal human connection? I think that when we change our thinking around these things and we start to do things like buying local, slowing down, taking that our time to do it, to think about it, we build those relationships with each other better. And to me, that's really, really important. The last one there, package free. So if I can buy something that's naked, so things like soap, I'll get that without any packaging. I do want to learn how to make soap though. That's one of my goals for this year, is learning how to make my own soap. Again, so if I can bulk buy something, if I can make something, so for example, yogurt, I'm sort of trying to do, instead of using the sachets, just reusing my old yogurt to make new yogurt, but I haven't quite perfected that yet. So trying to make things like cosmetics, deodorant, all of that sort of stuff, and growing things as well. So that's sort of the things that I think about when I look at an item. Okay, I go, okay, can I do this differently? If I don't like where that item has come from and I don't like where it is going, all right, I'm going to change one of those two things. Okay, so like plastic water bottles, for example. I hate plastic water bottles. Everything about plastic water bottles is just stupid. The fact that they steal water from out of the ground, put it into plastic, which is again just oil still like stolen from the ground, and then people drink it in a space of about 5 minutes, and then they throw it in the bin. I think is the most stupidest thing on the planet. So of course I'm going to start with the production bit, and I'm just going to take my own water bottle, and that's how I sort of solve that whole problem. So that's so that's what I think about. So every item, like things like my pen, for example, I really struggle because teachers use lots of whiteboard markers. We use lots of pens all the time, and I really wanted to be able to refill them. So I now have a Pilot refillable fountain pen that I use just as my normal pen, and my whiteboard markers now are a refillable brand called Ozpen, which I use all the time. So I love those two things to bits, and I take care of them, and hopefully I'll have them for a very, very long time. So I thought a really good exercise for us to do so that you can take something away, I suppose, from the chats that we've had today, is I want you to think of an item that you've used today. So whether it's your, I don't know, your toothpaste, or even like the glasses that you're wearing, I don't know, something that you have, or something that you have interacted with. I want you to think about, where did it come from? What is it being used for? What could it be used for? And where will its life end? Okay, so we might have, I'll leave the slide up there, but if you want to take maybe 2 minutes to have a think about that, if you want to write down your own notes or something like on your phone, and then I thought we might share that with one another about how, like where that's coming from. And then if you could change something about one of those things, or one of the things that you could change at any of those points. So if you want to change where it comes from, or you want to change where its life ends, have a think about what you could do instead a bit differently.
I'll put my timer on.
Yeah, good idea.
I think that's it. We can come back together.
Alrighty. So did anyone, I will stop sharing now. Did anyone want to go ahead and sort of share their thoughts about that? Barbara, do you want to go?
She's waving her phone.
Barbara, do you want to unmute yourself, or? Is it just me that can't hear Barbara?
No.
Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Just.
Yeah. Okay, this is my mobile phone. Now, it came from my sister, and her husband gave it to her. It belonged to him first. Then he gave it to his wife, and she gave it to me. And when I'm finished with this, when he gets the next new one, it'll go to the sister I live with. So,
I'm thinking what happens once whatever the network is finished, then it will go, where will it go? And it be recycled after that, the parts of it.
Yeah, I think there are places where mobile phones can be recycled. Normally, there are the shops in the middle of the shopping centres where they have the mobile phone fixing places. Sometimes they have them, or Officeworks and Harvey Norman tend to have electronic recycling places. It's fascinating seeing how they recycle mobile phones, because they explode them and then they draw out all the metals and stuff like that to be able to reuse them again. So it's really quite fascinating. So if you can find a place to drop it off once it's at the end of its life, it's a really great thing to do. Awesome. Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah. Can I just interrupt? There's a group called EcoActive that will pick up. You just have to contact them and they will pick up pretty well all of your electronics, phones, laptops, desktops, iPods, batteries, and they'll do it for literally no cost apart from the batteries. So,
Melbourne?
Andrew, do you know if they're Sydney based or national? Because there's often a issue between city and country. That's a big whole discussion.
National. I don't know about country versus city, but I think there are offices in Melbourne, but they've got one in Sydney, so I think it's national.
There's also a group called Fair Phone, and I don't know, my phone's getting a bit funny at the moment, and I was thinking of it's fairphone.com, a phone that cares for the planet, and I think that is maybe useful to look at if you need to buy a new one. I think you have to bring them in, and I'd prefer to buy it in Australia. Like a lot of people buy things online, but every time it's energy to bring something, so it's better to buy from a shop that's already done the effort.
Yes, agree. All right, anyone else that wanted to share their thoughts on that one?
So Alice, I just looked at my top, what I'm wearing at the moment.
Oh yeah.
Polyester cotton. So not a good thing really unfortunately. So I think part of that is obviously the choice at the beginning, if possible, trying to find products that are made from natural fibres. That can but it's a whole wardrobe of things that
I think it's
you
hard.
Obviously have to just wear them out as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I always struggle with, I've got a ton of clothes that are polyester and all that sort of stuff, but I've had them for maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years for some of them that still fit me. So like the shirt that I'm wearing here, this one's actually made of silk that I bought from a lady that handmade it at a market. And it was just because I saw it and I fell in love with it, and I talked to her and she had such a beautiful story. But you can see actually my clothes that are hanging up there I'm wearing tomorrow to work, like they're both secondhand. So so sometimes with teaching and stuff, depending on which classroom you're in or what you're doing with the students and things like that, we do actually go through lots of different types of clothing that we need. Because I have looked into things like a minimalist wardrobe as well. So not having, although I feel like for males, every male has a minimalist wardrobe. But I've looked into that, but it's just not practical for the types of things that I do in my everyday life. So where I can, buying secondhand or buying with natural fibers where I can, and all that sort of stuff is definitely part of the process. So next time when we go and buy something, that's the thing. And also just on that, so with purchasing, as Philippa mentioned before, when she read that bit from Laudato Si about the moral choice we make when we're going and purchasing something, that is such a big deal. Like the more that we can send a message to the people that produce items and sell items that we value or not value the product that they have, the better that they go, like the more they're going to start to change. So that's why I tend to try and shop less from Woolworths and more at like the local fruit and vegetable shops and those sorts of things, is to send the message that I don't like the fact that, you know, Woolworths import tons and tons of items and stuff, as well as, you know, they package everything to the nth degree, and the products that they buy are all packaged to the nth degree as well. You know, all of that sort of stuff. So sending that message where we can sometimes speaks way louder than just emailing them or you know, or whinging about it on Facebook or whatever it is. So yeah, so that sort of situation, it gets people to think differently. So yeah.
So does anybody else have a, Liz, would you like to?
Yeah, just wonder, I think it was the week before's Age on Saturday, there was, I don't know whether, I don't know whether you can see this. It's back the front when it comes up.
That's
fine. No, we can read it.
Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's soap and shampoo and conditioners.
Yeah.
And it's called, it's shampoo-with-a-purpose.com. It's all natural Australian made, and there's no packaging.
Yes. Yeah.
It's supposed to, you know, replace all our shampoo bottles and all that sort of stuff. And I thought I'd give that a try. I haven't done it, but they do send samples, and I just thought that was a great, you know, thing to try.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think one of the benefits of these kind of sharings is many heads have more ideas, and I think that maybe we could commit to even all of us thinking about our top 3 or 4 things that we do in our lives and sending them to me by email, and I'll undertake to put that together into a collective list that'll be more useful for more people. So,
yes.
And with your permission, if we can use your slides and maybe make
definitely, yes,
available to people, because I think part of what I was trying to flag before is that each of us can make changes, and if we share ideas and they may vary from state to state, but we may be able to find pathways to achieve the same end. And if we keep in touch and share ideas, then it's a shared journey, and we can find out that somebody stumbled across some fantastic way how to recycle or compost or reuse things.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of the sharing, I just wanted to flag, Alice, I don't want to stop you in midstream, but just to sow the seeds of thought about how and whether each of us may take the next step from doing something in our own life to being a bit of a change agent in the spaces we're in, because that kind of cuts to the heart of, you know, boy with the finger in the dike. We don't all want to be just turning ourselves inside out. We want to be trying to encourage others. And Andrew stepped away from his mic for a minute, but he was talking about doing something at the parish level, and I think, Paul, you were also. So I think it'd be interesting just to have a bit of a, before the end of our time in 15 minutes, doesn't have to be right now, but I'd like to put a little bit of time aside, just to have that conversation about who are our communities of influence and how could we support each other to reach out to them, doing something under the banner of Living the Change, just so we can populate that space with activities that will give other people hope and inspiration that there are things happening and there's a place involved. Back to you, Alice.
Yeah, so, well, do you want to add that? So if you have something that you've decided that, or you think that you want to change in terms of an object that you want to interact with, I just got seen that thing from Susan about the Lush shampoos. They're pretty good, yes, and Lush do have some questionable ethics in general. Yeah,
I checked that out because they were supporting Ro Morrow on her permaculture, permaculture work. And so I've been using them for a number of years. So I just read that. So we've got to really keep sharp on what we do.
Yes. Yeah, and the more you learn.
Change where we move according to, if they're not, I will write them a letter about that, because that was concerning to me, and yeah, I will move.
Yeah, that's
Can I just say to
my Facebook post, I'll put it on my Facebook post as well.
Eileen?
And there's a group of people called Ethical Shopping. If you go onto their website and their advice, it gives you a wonderful backdrop to the ethics of the various companies and who owns what, and I find that a wonderful guide.
Alice, with Source, I went into Source, and even Ceres Farm in Victoria, which I'm getting an organic box, which lockdown's been good. I'm an avid reader of labels for years. And also you notice with Woolworths online, because we have to buy it online now, that you can't, because we're in lockdown, so you can't see where they're from. Even Source, a lot of their stuff, and I didn't go back, it's overseas. Even Ceres, that's an organic, when you look at their tins of beans, they're all from a number from overseas. So for me, that counteracts going to a green shop. And with the series, I will write a letter about that, because I've only just started going there.
So it's interesting. Sorry, did you see? It was interesting. The asparagus from Chile versus the tins, and so it's interesting because this conversation, we're living the change. There is a whole recycling rubbish polluting the planet discussion. And I guess for living the change purposes, just because of the urgency of the climate part of that, we're kind of focusing where we can on the emissions bit of it, of how the choices we make can give a double benefit, both of reducing waste, but also reducing emissions from it. And from that perspective, it was interesting that a tin of something coming from Italy by boat was a hell of a lot less carbon dense in terms of emissions than asparagus that had been flown in from China or Israel or wherever else. But the food miles part of it, and the transport pathways, and the density of food to go into the product, because cheese, it was the sheer volume of milk, as you were talking about earlier, going into it that made a big difference.
And when we're talking about things like this, I mean, this is the whole thing. We're talking about the environmental impact of it, but there is the other impact that sits behind, which is workers' rights and wages, and so when we're talking about, particularly we talked about fashion before or clothes before, there's a key thing in that, and certainly with agricultural products, definitely. There's a lot about the wages and the working conditions that sit behind things.
I think the frustrating thing is we can't know everything. We can't know every single thing about where everything has come from. The only way that we can do that is if we grow it in our own backyard. And I think for most of us, that is the goal, is to, be as self-sufficient as possible and be able to grow our own fruits and vegetables and all those sorts of things. Just on the Source thing, whenever I shop at Source, I always try to find the ones that say it's explicitly Australian brand for things like nuts and rice and those type of things. But it is hard. But I do think, though, the benefit of something like Source is that they have a model in terms of the way they sell their products. So bringing your own container, coming in, tearing it and then filling it up and all that sort of stuff, having that conversation. I think that model of shopping and purchasing goods, that's probably something that I know I value and I would love to see more of, is moving into that sort of space as opposed to, just buying everything off the shelf and being wrapped in packaging and then probably also being flown from overseas and all those sorts of things as well. So I feel like they, on a whole, they have a step in the right direction, if that makes sense.
But in a way, they trick people.
They do, yeah.
Who don't, and there's a bit of a subculture of people who think they're doing the green stuff. I've seen it in Melbourne when I observed people when I was there, and it isn't from my, I'm not a purist, but let's think about. So people think they're doing the right thing.
Yes. Yeah, the greenwashing idea.
Yes, and I think there is a bit of that there.
And can I say here, Alice, I appreciate what you said about we can't know everything. And at the same time, it's very clear that a lot of principles and basic information that we either have or have not are all very interrelated. So the social justice information and the information about what it takes to raise the feed for meat for cows, and what it takes to, for instance, the pollution that goes into the rivers from the dye that goes into creating genes, and how that, you know, again, pollutes the atmosphere. So to speak only of waste, I would postulate that we need to also bring in other issues which are related, recognizing we can't know it all, but possibly to have some principles at our fingertips and some focus questions. Okay, when I'm buying, what's the social justice issues related here? What are the ecological issues? What are economic issues? What is a truth that I'm being told? Am I being told everything on the list of ingredients that actually, what's being left out?
Yeah. Can I share with you something just on that? I love that thinking. So this was some work that I did. I'll just share my screen with you here. This was some work that I did in my master's study that I've been doing recently, because I'm doing a master's in theology at the moment. So a guy called Father Joshua Carwardine, he works in the Vatican, and he's done a lot of work with that Laudato Si document. And from that Laudato Si document, he's pulled out 7 virtues. So like, you know, things that we should be trying to build in relation to the environment, right? And this is, I suppose, my Bible now. Like, this is what I go from. So he talks about praise, gratitude, care, justice, work, sobriety, and humility. So they're the 7 virtues that he identified. I've also got here, this was just something I made up for some students of mine, all the Laudato Si sections that it's in relation to. So when we're trying to do better for the environment as a whole, like reducing waste is definitely part of it, but we also need to think about justice. That needs to be a big thing. We need to live a more sober lifestyle. We need to live with humility, and all of those things together will build us to be ecological converts. It will build us on the right path for what we need to be in the world at the moment. What I did as part of my master's study, if you look to the other side here, is I thought about, well, what are the sins or what are the bad things that we can oppose this? So I said disassociation, so disconnecting from the environment, disconnecting from others, exploiting, so whether that's people or resources, so into the justice side of things as well, harming, okay, in relation to the environment itself or others, contributing to the inequality, specifically of other people. Waste is one of them as well. Greed in our own hearts, and being arrogant that we are, because we're human, we're so much far above the rest of creation as well. So I suppose this is the bigger picture beyond, in terms of the whole ecological crisis, the bigger picture that doesn't just sort of target waste. And I think this was the conversion that I went on. When I went through Lent, the waste was the thing that got me, but ultimately it transitioned into everything in my life. It transitioned to the fact that, you know, when my husband and I went to go and buy our house that we now have, it was a must. I had to have solar panels. There was no way I was going to go into another house that didn't have solar panels on there. You know, it's in how I treat my grandma. It's in everything. It's in how I shop, what I choose to do, how I deal with my waste, and all of those types of things. So it did become all encompassing. And you're right, it is such a bigger picture than just thinking about waste. It has to be bigger than that. And so often we see this in Laudato Si. We know that there is the relationship between hearing the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So like we see here, every ecological approach needs to incorporate a social perspective which takes into account the fundamental right of the poor and the underprivileged. So that's, yeah, we're definitely on the right track with that one. So yeah. All right, I think we've only got 5 minutes left. So I think Philippa was saying about sharing in relation to how we're going to influence our small spheres around us, the people and the organizations that we work for. So did anyone have any ideas about how they're going to take their living the change ideas to others? And we'll finish up with that.
Well, also I think about how you would like this network to support you. So I want to have this co-created or co-held, if you like. So, you know, the webinars are coming from members of the Living the Change community that have got particular passion for an area, that have offered to run something, and they're part of the elements that you can pick up to do a Living the Change event or to badge it with that. So I sent you in the email just the link to the current website, which has been updated in the last 6 months, and also to last year's list of their whole kind of smorgasbord of ideas, of things that you could commit to in your own life or could be part of moving forward in those categories. So I just wanted to sort of throw it open to the floor, just to really hear back from you what you would like to see, what would be helpful. What is it that we could do in this online space that's going to be practical to add to this really helpful deep dive Alice has given us on the food element of it. So do people have any thoughts they'd like to contribute on what they'd like to see happening?
It would be interesting to know where people are at in our communities. You know, talking about what people should or could do, it'd be interesting to know first, well, you know, what sort of things are people already doing? Like where on the continuum from denial to enlightenment and everything in between, where are they, so that we can focus our attention and our contribution in such a way that it makes sense for them.
I belong to the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy of Australia, and I have to say, by word of encouragement and support in all of this, we have a very comprehensive environmental sustainability policy and practice, and it's in our faces all the time, you know, and it's and we've got a lot of practical, you know, everyday things that we ought to be doing. And so if anybody wanted to tap into the Mercy world with regards to some ideas or policies or practices, or our environmental sustainability manager and coordinator and all that, they're very willing to share their stuff. And they, you know, they've done the Al Gore program, and they're so, you know, it is big. You know, those people who are individuals out there, there is a lot happening, and you know, we're not individual alone pilgrims on this.
No, I agree. And the Mercies have done a hell of a lot, Eileen. What you've triggered in my mind is whether people would be willing for me to share all of your emails so that you can follow up individually with people, because I, out of you know, respect for people, I don't share emails without explicit permission to do so. So I BCC'd you all for this call. But I do think there are lots of cross links and sharings that can be done. And examples like the Mercy Sisters have done amazing work on energy as well. So, you know, your coordinator there has done some great stuff. He shared at the National Council of Churches. So the more the merrier, I think, with those examples. And the Quakers also, Sue, have got some deep experience in frugal living, you know, thoughtful choices. Yeah.
But we need to live richly too.
Yes.
And the richness, and I think sometimes we model the wrong way. Alice, what you said about taking your grandmother to the art gallery, that's modelling. It's getting away from the shopping centre.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to show. Beauty, art, Mind you, Quakers aren't big into that. They're into pretty simple living, but this is my own little crusade. I'll say my own personal crusade.
The more joy, the better, Sue. Let it rip.
Yeah. And also good, well-dressed second-hand clothes.
Yes.
Clothes. I buy second-hand, well-dressed, not daggy, smart.
Yeah, there's a whole thing about and that's what fast fashion has done to op shops. It's filled op shops up with Zara and H&M and all those sorts of things, and it's taken away the good quality stuff that used to be there. Yes.
On changing people.
Slow clothes as well as slow food, eh?
Yeah, well, changing people is really interesting. I'm having a run-in with my Peruvian nephew-in-law. Now, they are meat eaters, that whole culture. I'd actually like to tie him down. I was thinking today, perhaps for my birthday, I'll make all the family force them to watch the Third Planet show. Or at my funeral, I'll make them all watch it because, people, maybe I should put a challenge like, I want you to watch this. I've planned it in my funeral. Could you make me happy to see it now? Because I think people don't actually understand what's happening. And they don't understand. I didn't understand about the meat stuff. I knew I had to not do it. I thought because I ate too much and their feet were all over the place and all that. So I wonder how we, a bit like Philippa, that airline group that, not to fly as much.
Yeah, this was a global effort called Grounded in Faith.
Okay.
Or part of a bigger non-faith element, which was a behavioral psychologist in America, looking at what would it take people not to fly. So there was several years' work in it, including some pilot workshops called Grounded in Faith. And now a tiny element called coronavirus, COVID-19 has
stopped everything anyway.
Yeah. So I think there is a big.
They taught us to speak to others. What I started to do was have confidence to speak to others about this. And I think it's.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm looking forward to doing now that my husband and I have just moved into our house, because we were up at Harvey Bay and we've now moved back and all this sort of stuff. Like, I remember last year, I think for those that have been part of ARRC for a while, we remember like Mark Delaney was talking about the at-home, like the dinners and stuff, like inviting. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that I want to move into, like on my own reflection, is getting people to come to my house and to see, like if I cook for them like a vegetarian meal or a vegan meal or something like that. Like I did that at my wedding. We had the bridal shower beforehand. It wasn't really a bridal shower. I just had my aunties come around and we just sort of had morning tea. But all the things that we cooked for morning tea between me and my mum, they were all vegan, completely vegan, because I had one of my friends come who was vegan. I thought, well, it's just easier if we all eat vegan anyway. You can't taste the difference with the things that we were doing. So that's what we decided. And there was no one, like I didn't tell anyone until the end. It was like, oh, did you realize that everything that we had then was just vegan? And they're like, oh, really? And then, they said, oh, but we had scones and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, they were vegan scones. Like there's no difference. It was just, the different ingredients and stuff like that. But that sort of modeling and sharing a meal and doing all those sorts of things, I think that speaks volumes. Like when you do that, inviting people over, and that's that sort of small circular sphere, like having like a few friends who see the way that you do things, and then they go, oh, did you know that this person's done this? And that's all we're called to do anyway, is to do those small things. So yeah, there's a little bit of inspiration there for you, Sue.
Oh no, my birthday party, I'm done. The Peruvian's going to eat vegan, but I'm going to make it really good vegan.
Good.
I'm going to get the best vegan. I'll buy it. I'm not going to cook it.
Fair enough. Love that.
Well, I think we've gone 4 minutes over, so we probably should let Alice go, and thank her very much for coming and sharing that, gathered wisdom.
Anytime.
Thanks very much.
Really
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank
No
you.
worries.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Well, yeah, I'll see you guys later. Have a good night.
Thanks, Alice. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
And I'll send you all an email with your permission, with all of your emails showing, so you can follow up again, and look to, you know, holding some more of these discussions, and also trying to support you if you want to do things in your own spaces. So I know Andrew's going to follow up with Alice, but if there are some materials we can send through from ARC and you know, just support along the way, just to help the ripples spread out, we'll do what we can. So
Thank you.
So Alice, were you in amongst all that? Will you share your
slides
with Philippa, who can share them with us?
Yeah, I think I've already emailed Philippa my slide.
yeah, I've got a copy of them. I have,
Yeah.
And it's quite large. I don't know, I could share it via Google Docs, or I'll send it as an attachment. It's about 15 megabytes.
Yeah, it's a bit big. Yeah,
I
it's
might
just the
try and
photos.
keep photos, so I'll try and see if I can bring it down a bit. And also, just in the context, you've all got my email, so I'll take what's in the chat box, but if you've got other ideas that you think would be useful to share with the others, over the next few days, by the early next week, I'll send around to everybody a bit of a composition of what we spoke about, the slides, and some of the links that people have suggested for moving it forward, just so we can kind of weave the strands together as we go. So thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
hosting.
Okay.
See you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks, Philippa.
Bye.
Bye.
Good luck, everybody.
You too.